Dr. Jones. This is a depiction from one of the rides you go through, I think at Universal Studios, of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. When you go through it, strangely they put a lot of mix into it, though. There's Egyptian stuff that's hooked up with it, and of course that hooks up with the other movie where they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. Let's get into this here. In a study from Nawtzees to the Ark, 5 surprising truths about the Indiana Jones films. Sadly, the much-loved Indiana Jones movies don't represent the average day at work for most archaeologists, but there is more truth to Indy's swashbuckling adventures than you might think. Crystal skulls do exist. The Nazis really were very keen on archaeology, and the world's museums are full of artifacts that are taken from unsuspecting tribal peoples. Here are some of the more surprising things the films did get right. Well, I hope we don't go through that unsuspecting tribal people thing. For a lot of times, they gave them a pile of beads and so on, and they were okay with it. In fact, very wanting to have that happen. Not minding at all. A rating we will go. Crystal skulls and holy grails. Some of the artifacts featured in Indiana Jones are not as ridiculous as you might think. Crystal skulls made from crystal quartz, as featured in the 4th film, do exist. There's even one in the British Museum. Unfortunately, they are probably 19th century forgeries rather than pre-Columbian or alien artifacts. You've probably seen this movie and the depiction where they showed this alien elongated head. And when taking it back, there was a council, like 12 of them around and so on, and they all had their crystal skulls back, and this was this one. Just looking into the eyes of it like this caused you to go through things. Strange ideals. Well, looking at an object like this made people think strange things. Very strange things. You see, there's been proven fact that a few of these are just modern day forgeries, which in themselves are fantastic works of jewelry. I mean, outstanding. But they're able to look at them very fine, use real good magnifying glasses and so on, and can tell that they've been worked by modern machinery, or modern type machinery. And this is supposed to dismiss everything because nobody ever had anything that could have done like that before. But we've seen a lot of things like in Egypt and so on, which says there's something going on that we're not really knowing of. A lot of these have been dismissed, and like they say, they found 9, 10 of them or whatever, and so here's the idea: if they could just find the other few, and then once you put them all together, the aliens are going to come back, which are the gods, right? And take us to another level, save us from ourselves or some BS, right? Strange anomaly is there's 3 of these, at least 2, but 3 of these that are known that date from thousands of years ago and are not a modern anything, forgery or whatsoever. One of them's small, about the size of a baseball. Only one of them's really kind of human size. The other one's a little bit smaller. if you believe it was made by smaller humans somewhat. And then there's the old baseball one. But at least 3 of these can be dated to thousands of years ago and not have anything to do with a modern forgery whatsoever. Strangely, we keep looking at this idea of aliens having to come to Earth or something having happened from a distant thing, something, God knows what it was. Well, the Younger Dryas event cannot write off all of these things, though if you watch my videos, I would probably like it to. It can't. It shows a lot, and it shows a blending, but there was things going on before, and that's what we have a hard time reaching back at specks of. See little moments in the past and so on, and quite a few times here, just in the last few years, we've blown our own minds with what they've found of technologies before, predating different Iron Ages, Copper Ages, and so on. Distant trade and things like that. But I don't believe that these 12 skulls and this baseball one and these other ones were all together at one time or anything like that. There was a founding population that went and did this. They might have been able to show their prowess to these people by showing something like this. And of course, there are death cults all around the world. But if you put them all back together, I don't think anything radical is going to happen. But literally looking into the face of this, it gives you all kinds of ideas. I don't know if you understand it. Finding a piece of crystal that's intact, that's large enough as a human head that you could possibly work as hard as you have to work one of these things and get it chiseled down to the point that it turns into something that looks like a skull, and then a massive amount of polishing and then recarving and polishing again to get to this point, and it never fractured or anything. You can see this seam running right through the forehead and down off the left side of the nose here. It's like a crackling inside of it and a fractured point that easily could have been fractured to the point we wouldn't be looking at this thing possibly right now. This is one of the fakes, you know, and it makes you wonder how many pieces the guy went through to actually pull this off. There's been videos done about this because in effect they knew about the other ones, and so they tried to make this as a fake to pimp up that idea. Well, why would they do it? Well, because some people believe there's some truth to this. It's like the ancient aliens thing in the first place. Whenever I was a kid, there was like Project Blue Book and all of that stuff. And the anomaly was this. 99.9% of them all can be wrote off. Literally looking at the numbers, 24,680 things can get writ off or whatever. Problem is, there's 217 that cannot be written off by any way, and there's actually evidence-y type stuff, but that gets written off because you see all these other ones. I showed you the swamp gas one, and where the lady freaked out on looking at Venus, if that's what it was. So, because of that, you have to believe all this other is BS. People get pushed into this idea a lot. Let's just go on. So this is a crystal skull in the British Museum. While we have never found it, or at least 9 countries, including Ethiopia and Egypt, are rumored to be the location of the lost Ark of the Covenant. The wood and gold chest is central to the Raiders of the Lost Ark and rumored to contain the stolen slabs etched with the 10 Commandments. Also, the essence of God, because they used to go and burn certain herbs in a trap tent type area with it in there, and then afterwards they could commune with God. There's other parts where say there's something inside of there that's like radioactivity, and that's the reason that they built it the way that they did. because there's no reason to build it that way and have such a heavy lid and all the things that go along with it. But it could also be a battery type thing, like a Baghdad battery on steroids, and if you went up and you touched it, it'd give you the shock of God, which is electricity, so that goes along with a lot of other things. But what could be in there that they could just walk around and yell and all of a sudden the buildings fall down and all these ideas? Well, we talked recently about an air bolide event, which was real close to there, that actually affects over that point and could have been what blew down those walls at about the time that they show it. Doesn't really go with the Jacob's timing necessarily if you fall through in the Bible, but I don't want to go through all of that type of stuff. You know, last time I started getting deep into this thing, they just flagged my video because I started telling a little too much truth. So this box, though, you can find in Egyptian motifs and others that are right there in the area of carrying this box, and it was heavy enough that they have to put these poles through it and lift it up like you see in Indiana Jones. Supposed to be angels on top and blah 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 blah, all goes along with it. Weird thing that they don't mention here, I guess, in this is that whenever Indy tried to find this thing, where he actually went was where the Hyksos were, in Avaris and Tanis. And there was that special thing, like some kind of Dungeons and Dragons-y weird deal. Well, he had to get the staff to the certain size that burned the guy's hand with a jewel in it, and with the sun coming up just a certain day, made it through the window at a certain point that made it light up, and that would show you where it was. Strangely, we look at archaeoastronomy, and that's the type of thing that goes on. Sure, it's real elaborate. Does it make you go crazy? William Morris's version of the Holy Grail. So here we see Templar type people on the left, or people from Arthur and so on, meeting up with some angels, all of which are blonde, with the angels' wings are red, by the way. But then there's also this priest type that's coming up into the holy sanctum where this Holy Grail is. And in that room, you're seeing a table and some angels standing behind it, but don't have their wings. And on that is a special cup, right? Now, a lot has been said about the cup, and everybody, until the Indiana Jones movie, I don't think anybody got the idea that it wasn't a jewel-encrusted, incredible goblet of like even gets shown in Excalibur and so on. For if we look at the Jesus tale, it would have been a different type of cup, whether it would have been gold lined like they even show in the first place and just hewn out of wood, or what would have been the one that symbolically would have been there at this Last Supper situation. Somehow somebody kept the cup, and then they caught the blood of Christ with all that. It's kind of odd, and there's an esoteric knowledge to that. But the Holy Grail featured in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which supposedly featured the Last Supper and caught the blood of Christ during the crucifixion, is even more a mystery. It does not actually appear in literature until the 12th century in a legendary tale of Joseph of Arimathea, in which the Grail is sent for safekeeping in Britain. There's a reason for that. I've shown you a few hints at the idea of where people were, where they went, genetics showing it too. Just recently, this Joseph of Arimathea, see, that's also a connective, because he's the guy that used to do the tin mining and all that stuff and all connective, but that's Joseph Bar Matthias, and this is Josephus. There's far too many connections I could make here, and about one or maybe two that I could make that probably flag this thing. So let's just go ahead and leave that alone and take a right down here and veer off. And look at this stuff. Real or not, however, all these legendary artifacts do reveal a truth that many archaeologists have a personal holy grail. One that's personal to you, and it's not this cup, but it's this thing. It's probably not an actual artifact. It is probably objects, relationships with other things, people, or structures that actually allow us to interpret the lives of past cultures. We do not aim to collect objects. We aim to answer questions about how and why human societies change, and that's our Grail quest. Speaking for archaeologists, that's really it. It's what makes a metal detector want to find a button off of somebody from Civil War, or a coin, for who knows, they might find that cachet, right? Just like Göbekli Tepe, written off 3, 4, or 5 times by people saying, well, that's Byzantine stuff or something, and not even real good. It's been out in the weather, and meh. Well, after Navali Quarry got taken down by the same man who excavated it, he said, went over there, and now we have a whole different outlook on the civilization 10,000 years ago. It's quite a jump. Things like that are a holy grail. Literally, tablets in Sumeria that we have found showed us, here's where the tail comes from, here's where the tail comes from. Oh no, it doesn't come from that. Look, the Babylonian captivity and so on and stuff. It's just, that's where it goes. Abraham was from Ur, whether you believe it's Urfa or Ur itself, and they were trying to make connectives on it. Let's get a little touchy here. Nazis and nationalists. The N-words were the villains of both Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Last Crusade, which again isn't far from the truth, for the Nazis' archaeology was central to proving their arguments for Aryan superiority. Well, just the fact that they had been hooked up with a people that had done all of these things. People in modern day tried to take this to an area just weirdly, wickedly stupid, but in reality, they were verifying something, and it became quite verified. Nazi research missions under the guise of the Ahnenerbe, which are really just archaeology department of themselves, were dispatched to a surprising variety of places in order to demonstrate the influence of Aryan migrants in prehistory, including Poland, the Andes, Tibet, India. All across the Americas, the swastika has been shown and stuff, but that was probably before, if you want to write it off, that they had the symbology from before. They came across that bridge, kept it for a few thousand years, and then started showing up like crazy. Or there's a different reality to that, along with Tibet, India, and so on. I've shown that symbol before, which kind of blew me away whenever I tried to look into what these people thought. And finding where they were, remnants, and a symbol, not just one, and an ideal, and a similar symbology, a similar outlook on religions and so on that are vastly different over time but closely connected, shows that there's a common thread. It starts before in a time that we don't have record of course, and so we're just looking at symbols and stuff like you kind of see at the bottom of the picture here, but eagles clawing on the snakes and all these things too. See, another thing with that starting picture we were looking at that I didn't go into was, and I will now, it's kind of disgusting that every bad guy, not just in this movie series, but for years has actually been these Germanic people for what they did in World War II. And it got old whenever I was a kid, to the point that you were like, not again. It's always the duh. Well, it's either them, or then it's got to be the Orientals, the Japanese, because of World War, Pearl Harbor and stuff going on at the same time. But picking out of the thing, this is the bad one, of course, because of what happened to certain people. But if you're looking at this time and this archaeology and when they're trying to find these things, and this would have been in that picture down below a representative of the Aninurbe. And the thing that we're showing in the movies is that some of these people hooked up with Britain and American archaeology were digging off into these things too. Strangely, they're thrown in a box and shoved in a museum someplace. Well, they deserve to be a museum. A lot of people need to chill out about the idea that all museums need to be taken down and all the stuff given back and everything. That's what gives you the drive to look at things like this, to put a collection together that a lot of people have put together before and give that to a museum and add to it to a point they have a collection showing you around the world. So in major sites around the world, you can go and look at things like this. The Egyptian Museum couldn't hold all the things that we get if everybody gave everything back. Even that new site they've got, it's incredible. They can't even hold what they have. A lot of it is kind of meh, but a lot of stuff that we have is not necessarily so meh. But you've got to have examples and showings around the world of the history of the world. In a modern day, we have all this kid gloves crap going on and stuff that's kind of past disgusting. Where something that was looked at as being fantastic just a few years ago is all of a sudden looked at as being, oh no. I think it's terrible and a travesty, but let's continue. Perhaps the most telling are the works of Gustav Cassina, whose book, A German Prehistory, a Preeminent National Discipline, set out the archaeological justification for the annexation of Poland. Cassina based it on the supposed presence of Germanic peoples there during prehistory. And while he died before Hitler came to power, he was active while the territorial negations at the Versailles Conference after World War I were taking place. Well, these are books that led up, and everybody knew about this type stuff, so everybody started looking into it. Well, some people looked into it a little bit deeper, and after they found a few things, it was like a treasure map. So Indiana Jones fighting Nazis is an honorable and historically accurate portrayal. Even the modern battleground against the national pseudo-archaeology is now shifted to Twitter. And so you think about something like this. This is the ark here, and it's covered up with a black cloth, but it's being carried by people. The poles in this and the weight that it would have actually been, the description given, would have been bigger round poles, a lot longer, and instead of having one on front of each side and one on back each side, you would have had to have two or three. That's even shown in Egyptian art, where it'll take a few people to do it, where they did the same ideals, where it kind of comes from. But again, where they found this thing at? Hyksos area, isn't it? Tennis. That's even where they were digging in the wrong spot and all that stuff. Yeah, well, shortly after this, we have Don't Look, Marion. Pretty cool, especially for the time. I've watched how they did it and melted the guy down and then sped it up and stuff. It's pretty cool. The Thuggees and the cult of Kali. So here we have that Temple of Doom. Was there a real Temple of Doom? Well, yeah, there kind of was. And we're talking about India. Dun, 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 dun. A rather strange mismatch of ideas in the Temple of Doom did have some basis in fact, although very loosely interpreted. The Thuggees, led in the film by the sinister Mola Ram, were a notorious criminal fraternity suppressed by the British in colonial India. The film's mistreatment of Kali is rather more obvious, however. Despite popular iconography, the fangs, red eyes, and penchant for blood, this Hindu goddess is generally revered as more than a destroyer, and is rather a more nuanced force than one represented in the film. It's kind of a yin and yang of life, this neutrality thing that comes out. It's different. Kali Ma. But there's also something about those stones, you see, because the stones that they show them, which of course now we're showing these Caucasians helping out India again in this idea, while you look at these thuggee type people that are mixed, killing a merchant for his stuff that doesn't look like he's mixed, really, whenever he tries to come to India. But these stones, you see, what ended up being Spielberg's wife really interested in it was, of course, that there were diamonds inside of the rocks. Like, if they got them back, maybe they'd bust them open and she could have the diamonds or something, who knows what. But hey, diamonds are girl's best friend, so we go. But the ideal that comes from is a geode, and a polished geode stone. I did a video about this. Even you can take and hack a geode stone open, and inside of it are crystals that look like diamonds. It's its own little world inside there. It's amazing. After slicing it real good, you can put it back together and it just looks like an egg, and quite often they make them look like an egg, and then you open up the egg and there are crystals inside of there. The other form of them, because of the name geode, is the earth, and a round ball that you can turn it into that's polished, but then you can crack it open, and inside the earth, due to the pressure of the earth and there's not magma in the very center of it, but pressure and all those things form these crystals, are these diamonds. Still have that idea today. That's how diamonds are formed and so on. It's either that or Superman just stares at it real good and squeezes it, right? Well, in modern day, we can actually cause enough heat and pressure and then smack it hard enough that we can cause fake diamonds, ones to be used in oil drilling and so on, and even some in jewelry, but they have to be picked through quite a bit. Those are thuggies strangling a traveler. That belongs in a museum. Well, this quote from The Last Crusade possibly is the most famous line spoken by Indy and the most problematic for archaeologists and museums. Well, not really. It portrays the idea that some of these things should be put in a museum, and some people have a collection at their homes, millionaires and so on, that whenever they pass, a lot of times, they pass it on to a museum and it actually becomes an exhibit. So on. Sometimes people even get wings named after them, things like that. But so this reinforces the idea that Western academics have a right to excavate and display the world's cultural treasures. Indeed, major national museum collections from the British Museum to the Louvre were founded on this very belief. But in a post-colonial world, this attitude has become hotly contested. Of course, even the Greeks. This is the Elgin marbles that you see right here, just a few of them. And even though they're cracked up into pieces, Greeks really, really wanted them back because they go with a sacred artifact. Do artifacts belong in museums? Or do they belong to the people from whom they were taken? What if those artifacts were removed more than a century ago from a tomb built 4,000 years ago from a place now occupied by people who have no relationship from the original inhabitants? Knock, knock. These are the ethical questions museums must struggle with. For example, debates over return of the Parthenon or Elgin marbles to Athens from the British Museum are a long-running. Cambridge students recently voted to return to Nigeria a bronze cockerel, which was removed in 1897. The artifacts even became embroiled in geopolitics when Egypt severed ties with the Louvre over the return of ancient Egyptian remains. And I think that's sad. But that happened due to Dr. Hawass wanting certain things back for the new museum. Well, that comes from long ago. There were a people that were interested enough in the history of the world and how everything came to be. The same people that heralded civilization, actually. And it's not a proof that that happened, but it's examples from around the world of artifacts. In a modern day, what I love about watching videos like on YouTube and so on is I can go someplace that I will never go. But I can go there with a camera and take a look, see some of the artifacts and so on. I don't have to stay there for a 64-day dig. I can get some pictures of the way it looked, and then now after the dig, and then all the artifacts and what they say all about it, but then pick through that idea a little bit better and maybe get a little more information out there than what gets said. Yeah, I stayed long enough for it to pause on me here. So, there has been a few different antagonists, if you will, in the Indiana Jones museums, or Indiana Jones movies, rather than just the end people. But everybody talks about nowadays trying to repatriate stuff back and so on. Well, it should actually be done in the other way even more. Yeah. And we can give them some things too that we have from our old, and put it in their museum if they want to make a little wing for Greece someplace. Real nice. They all agree upon it. If they're willing to build all a museum and everything. This is a modern thing they're catching into. A lot of people would say it's because of jealousy and all these different things, but it's a beautiful thing that you can go to one of these major cities and you can see all of these things. It would be nicer if you could take 4, 5, 6 of those and put them all together and become a giant one, but then where would that be? There's enough in Egypt alone without having all of this. They have the Tutankhamun stuff and the things that they think are the most bam, so they've got it. Even though that was found by Carnarvon and everything, so, but leave that idea alone. They have enough to overfill the old and new museum if they put everything out there, seriously. And there's a whole lot more that they know that is there that they haven't excavated. Bumps in the sand that they know is something. Sometimes they know what it is, sometimes they might not. What's certain is that each claim for repatriation must be carefully weighed on its own merits. Indiana Jones didn't always appreciate this. Well, no, Indiana Jones is not supposed to appreciate that. He's also not supposed to eventually make people freak out and think of ideas like this, for the ideas that should be in a museum and not just taken off into people's private collections. If we had what's in private collections now, you would have a big cup of shut the fuck up for a couple of 100 years, and then you could worry about it again. This is kind of more the idea that was put forth rather than there shouldn't be any museums. That's quite the opposite. Isn't it weird to live in bizarro opposite world? A life of romance and adventure. Archaeology really can be adventurous, maybe not adventure of the poisoned darts and jumping over chasms variety of Indiana Jones, but the moment when you unearth something really exciting, anything from a sarcophagus to a 10,000-year-old work flint nodule or a Stonehenge type setup that shows you, oh wow, depending on your interest, is the reason archaeologists stay in the business. Of course, occasionally it can be dangerous too. Just consider Lord Carnarvon and the Curse of Tutankhamun, practically an Indiana Jones plot device. Well, they can't put all that together, but then they said, oh, it happened because of that and so on. Well, the yellow mold and things like that are really the problem. Funny they have that in Dungeons and Dragons as an idea, and rust molds that'll ruin your artifacts and so on, so you won't be able to fight anything. Personally, I'm still waiting to be offered a course in basic whip handling. I know how to handle a whip, by the way. And I own a trilby rather than a fedora, so a different type hat, perhaps a little more time-teamed than Indiana Jones, but while we now avoid sacrificing our students to angry sun gods, even if only because the health and safety of paperwork, if a new major Hollywood movie is a reflection of the central place of archaeology in our cultural consciousness, then I think we should all be pleased. No, I've got a different ideal on that. I don't know if you do. I like the Indiana Jones movies for what they are. I think that archaeology should continue. I think they should be put in museums and so on. Sure, right there at Göbekli Tepe and in that area at Sanliurfa, they should put that hub museum, and it's not too far to go to all the other ones and look at that, and each little one's got their little thing there. Should they uproot all the T-pillars and pass them out to all the museums? No one's even asking to do that. Look, we've been able to take, and with our incredible devices of science, take lasers and paint the whole thing with lasers, and then come back and make exact replicas of the whole thing and set it up just like it, like they've got in Sanliurfa. If you want to set up something like that, you can do it. They're doing an idea like that in 3D projection on King Tut's tomb, and so they could make a fake one that they could pass around to different ones, or you could get your own, just like they've done to even old cave paintings, where they've recreated the cave itself, an exact wall, projected exactly onto it and painted it out to the point that it looks, well, if you've gone and seen the real one and this one, you can see the difference. But it's a representation of it, meant to not ruin the original. These things in museums are being saved and conserved much more than they would be if they rotted away in the ground. More often than not, in archaeology, what we find is things that are rotting away that we barely caught. Modern day in DNA, what we're looking at is the remnants barely caught. And if we give it just a few more generations, we may not have been able to even get it in the first place. Of course, we may advance more and be able to get better, but if they're rotting away to the point that it's going to be lost before you get that technology, it's gone. Oh, but you already have it and it's conserved right here. Here's the mummy. So it's not decaying at the same rate. They're doing all these things to ensure it, setting up all kinds of devices and things that humidify and dehumidify and all kinds of things to make sure things work out exactly right for the longest preservation they can get. Yeah, restoration, putting things back together, selecting certain kinds of glues and stuff like that to save and protect something like that. They really have it going on. A lot more than some other place that might do it and do haphazard stuff. Instead of hating museums for what they are, you should hate locals for taking and destroying their own thing that they may not be related to in the first place. All of these ruins that we've been seeing that have been destroyed by people here recently running through there, but also looting that's gone on like crazy. It does have an upside, though, because whenever they find a looted spot, they go, well, there's something here. They start excavating, and they go, well, here's some of it they didn't find. But it all makes you wonder where they did find it, because that's not showing up in museums like popcorn here. So where's all this stuff going? Again, we have the idea of private collectors getting a large portion of archaeology, whenever it deserves to be in museums. Let me know what you think down below. Peace. Boink.